Oprah Winfrey tut es, Arianna Huffington tut es, Meg Ryan und Angelina Jolie ebenfalls und auch Steve Jobs soll darauf geschworen haben. Achtsam meditieren. Der Trend der Achtsamkeit oder die Mindfulness ist aus den USA längst in die Schweiz gelangt. Auch am diesjährigen WEF in Davos wurde täglich meditiert. Und zwar unter der Leitung von Jon Kabat-Zinn, der die Achtsamkeitspraxis im Westen berühmt gemacht hat. Ich freue mich sehr, dass er heute bei mir im Studio ist. Herzlich willkommen, Jon Kabat-Zinn.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here, Barbara.
Sie kommen direkt vom Flughafen. Haben Sie heute schon meditiert?
You know, this is a kind of unusual question in the sense that when you really enter into the practice of meditation, you very quickly come to realize that it's not simply a matter of making time during your day to formally meditate, but it's more that how are you in relationship with the entire unfolding of your life. So really life itself becomes the meditation practice after a while, and not just sitting like a statue in the British Museum in a cross-legged posture.
Machen Sie das überhaupt nicht mehr?
Oh, of course I do that, but I don't consider that to be any more the real meditation than being on an airplane and you know, being aware while I'm driving to the studio to have this interview with you and so forth. So from my point of view, even this conversation is a form of meditation.
Da bin ich gespannt, wie das Gespräch verlaufen wird. Wenn man sich fragt, was Achtsamkeit eigentlich ist, Mindfulness, dann ist es interessant, dass Sie in Ihrem Buch eine Geschichte eigentlich erzählen, die gleichzeitig in einem Cartoon wiedergegeben wird von Gahan Wilson. Sie beschreiben nämlich eigentlich diesen Cartoon hier. Wir sehen hier zwei Mönche und der alte Mönch sagt zum jungen Mönch, nichts passiert als nächstes. Das ist es. Ist es das wirklich schon?
Yeah, it's not that's it, it's this is it. In other words, this moment, whatever's unfolding, is the actuality of life lived, is one's experience of life unfolding. So the question is, are you even here for it? Or are you looking for some special experience to happen, some quote-unquote meditative experience, without recognizing that just this moment is incredibly special? Just the fact that I can move my mouth and my tongue, and you understand what I'm saying. And my eyes work, my ears work, your eyes work, your ears work. This is miraculous, and we can ignore it very easily. So mindfulness is basically saying every moment is incredibly special, so we don't have to privilege one over another, but it's more a question of how are we going to be in relationship to the pleasant moments, the unpleasant moments, and the moments that are neither and so very easily missed.
Und sehr oft sind wir nicht im Moment, sondern in der Zukunft.
Yes, well, our two favorite places to hang out, if you will, are the past in memory and all these thoughts about the past and why things happened one way rather than another, and usually who's to blame too. And then the future with worrying and planning. And, you know, that's perfectly fine. That's just the way the mind is. If we couldn't envisage the future, we wouldn't be human. And if we couldn't remember the past, we would be completely dysfunctional. But when you're completely absorbed in the past and the future without awareness, then the present moment, which is the only one we're ever alive in, gets a little bit squeezed. And then it influences the quality of our lives and the quality of our health and so forth.
Und diese Arbeit daran, im Moment zu sein, diese Mindfulness-Bewegung, das ist ein enormer Boom im Moment. Wenn man bei Amazon das Stichwort Mindfulness eintippt, dann erhält man über 40.000 Treffer. Es gibt Bücher, es gibt Kurse, es gibt CDs, DVDs und sehr viel davon bezieht sich auf Ihre Arbeit. Wann haben Sie, Jon Kabat-Zinn, realisiert, welchen Riesentrend Sie da losgetreten haben?
Well, let me first say that I think there are many, many different streams and many, many different people who are contributing to this flowering, if you will, of mindfulness in the mainstream world. So it's not simply me, but I will say that it was my intention to have this happen many years ago when I first established the mindfulness-based stress reduction clinic at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center. And the hope was that if we could find a way to really make meditation, and in particular mindfulness meditation, commonsensical to Americans who are experiencing stress, pain, chronic illness, and so forth, that it would take off like a wildfire, because there's so much suffering in the world, and we're always looking for fixes outside of ourselves to make it all better or make it all go away. And this is a way of actually befriending your own experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and being in wiser relationship to it, and therefore being able to, in some sense, navigate the ins and the outs and the ups and the downs of a life lived with full awareness and a certain degree of equanimity and self-compassion.
Wenn ich mir Ihren Weg vorstelle, ist es ja erstmal interessant. Sie haben Molekularbiologie studiert am MIT und dann wurden Sie während des Studiums irgendwie, sagen wir mal, infiziert vom Interesse an Meditation. Wie kam es dazu?
Well, I happened to go to a lecture in 1965 by somebody named Philip Kaplow, who was a reporter at the Nuremberg war trials. And then wound up later going to a monastery in Hokkaido, Japan, freezing cold in the wintertime, and learning Zen meditation. And he said, among other things, that it completely transformed his life, and he was suffering from ulcers and all sorts of stress-related problems. And within 6 months of meditating in a freezing cold monastery, all those problems went away. And I was like 21, 22 years old, and listening to that, I just realized that this was something I'd been looking for my whole life, as a way, in a sense, to unify scientific understanding of the body and of biology and of health with a kind of artistic understanding of the beauty of life and the many different ways in which it expresses. So I started meditating from that point on in 1965, and it was so meaningful to me, I just never stopped.
Und dann haben Sie 1979 eben diese Klinik gegründet. Sie haben dieses Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Programm gegründet, MBSR, das auch in der Schweiz eben Fuß gefasst hat. Man kann Kurse dazu besuchen. Ich stelle mir vor, dass das ein langer Weg war und wahrscheinlich auch viele Widerstände. Ich nehme nicht an, dass alle Ärzte Sie mit offenen Armen empfangen haben und gesagt haben, super Idee, machen wir jetzt. Es hat wahrscheinlich sehr viel Überzeugungsarbeit gebraucht Ihrerseits.
You know, it actually didn't present a lot of obstacles or challenges. That there's a certain way in which I think physicians know that they can only help their patients up to a certain point, and that it would be much better if people, in some sense, collaborated in their ongoing health care and in moving towards greater levels of health and well-being. And there are many different powerful ways to transform one's biology and one's physiology. And since I was trained as a molecular biologist in the laboratory of a Nobel laureate at MIT, people used to project onto me that I must know what I'm doing. So they kind of let me do it. And then their patients would go back to them and say things like, you know, that 8-week program, MBSR, did more for me in 8 weeks than you've done for me, my medical situation in 8 years. And the doctors realized that this is something that's really valuable to have within the sort of under the umbrella of medicine and medical care, so to speak, to empower patients to participate in their own health and well-being across the lifespan.
Sie engagieren sich ja auch weiterhin im Mind and Life Institute, dem auch Dalai Lama im Vorstand angehört. Und in diesem Institut geht es ja auch darum, eigentlich diesen Zusammenhang zwischen Buddhismus, Meditation und der modernen Wissenschaft herzustellen. Es gab verschiedene Studien, in denen man beispielsweise den buddhistischen Mönch Mathieu Ricard verkabelt hat. Man hat ihn in einen Kernspin-Tomographen gelegt. Wir sehen ihn hier im Bild, wie er sich da in den Tomographen reinlegt. Und also man hat sein Hirn untersucht und man hat dann gesehen, dass sich tatsächlich das Hirn während der Meditation anders verhält. Jetzt, Sie haben es schon gesagt, Sie sind Molekularbiologe, Naturwissenschaftler. Ist es für Sie wichtig, dass man sozusagen physikalisch, dass man das irgendwie naturwissenschaftlich erklären kann, dass es sich zeigt, auch wirklich im Hirn?
I think that is what's driving this whole movement of interest in the mainstream world in mindfulness and in meditation in general. And that is that there is more and more science being brought to it, and it's very, very convincing. And what you see there with Mathieu meditating is an instance of what we call neuroplasticity. In other words, that the brain itself is a very plastic organ of experience, and so it changes not just its activity, but also its very structure on the basis of repetitive activities of one kind or another. And meditation is a very repetitive activity, and some people might think at first that it's very boring because you're just like doing the same thing over and over again. But after a while, you realize that the present moment, nothing's more interesting than the present moment. So as soon as science started to develop, which I started doing in 1979, it was very hard for people to argue that this wasn't valuable, because not only did we have the anecdotal evidence from medical patients with lots of different chronic diagnoses, but also we had the scientific, more objective findings that this actually transforms your physiology and it transforms your brain architecture and structure. And we also now know, which we didn't then, through the science of what's called epigenetics, that it actually changes the expression of the genes in your chromosomes and upregulates and downregulates hundreds, if not thousands, of different genes that are responsible for cancer, inflammatory responses and all sorts of things like that.
Das klingt ja erstmal ein bisschen mysteriös. Können Sie das als Naturwissenschaftler erklären, wie sich epigenetische Veränderungen ergeben können durch Meditation?
Yeah, well, nobody really knows how it can be affected through meditation, and it's not just meditation. I'm sure that it's many different things, including diet, how much sleep you get, how deep your relationships are with other people. What we're understanding is that the biology of our own humanity is very complex and very interrelational. And so, for instance, if you cultivate stillness and equanimity, it has an effect on which genes are expressed in all of your chromosomes. We don't exactly know what the mechanism is for that, but we know enough already to know that this is important and that we should investigate it much, much more. I did a study back in the late 90s that showed that if you take people with psoriasis, a skin disease where you can see what's going on with their skin, and you put them in a light box, ultraviolet light box, they will get better. That's called phototherapy. But if you have them meditating while they're in the light box, they heal at 4 times the rate. Their skin clears at 4 times the rate of people who are just getting the light treatment by itself. So there's something that the mind is doing that can influence the body down to the level of gene expression, which is what epigenetics is all about, and cell division and things like that. And then there's also the interesting data about aging, because at the ends of all of our chromosomes are these structures, repeat DNA sequences called telomeres. And the telomeres seem to get longer when you meditate. And when you're under a lot of stress, they get shorter and shorter. And when you lose your telomeres, then your cells stop dividing. And that's a kind of biological signature of aging.
Sie haben vorhin gesagt, als Sie angefangen haben, wussten Sie schon, dass es den Leuten besser geht, dass viele von Erfolgen berichtet haben bezüglich ihrer Heilung, aber auch einfach von mehr Wohlergehen. Jetzt zeigt die Wissenschaft mehr und mehr auch in anderen Bereichen irgendwelche Resultate. Macht Sie das auch stolz?
I'm happy. I wouldn't say I'm proud of it, because I don't see it as a kind of individual accomplishment. What I'm very happy about is that there's so much suffering in the world. And much of it is created by our own minds and by our own lifestyles and by the way we treat each other. And if we can develop more and more convincing evidence that there are ways that we can take charge of our own lives and our own societies in ways that minimize suffering and harm and optimize well-being and health and wisdom and compassion, then it's almost kind of axiomatic that we would move more in that direction. And I think the evidence at this point is profound and maybe even overwhelming, that this is a capacity that is innate to us as human beings. And if we were to cultivate it, we would actually reclaim, or maybe for the first time, embody what we really mean when we call ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens, namely the species that knows and knows that it knows, or the species that is aware and knows that it's aware. And this is profound. We've called ourselves that for over 100 years, but I think now we really have the potential to embody it and generate, in this era, a kind of new renaissance that might really reduce all of the harm that's being done and the terror that's being, promulgated in various countries and societies that really is cause of enormous suffering and madness.
Wenn wir uns darüber unterhalten, worin dieser Weg besteht, der Achtsamkeit, dann ist Ihr Programm, das Sie entwickelt haben, hat ja eigentlich wie 3 Elemente. Es gibt den Bodyscan, in dem man den Körper achtsam beobachtet. Es gibt unterschiedliche einfache Yoga-Übungen und die Meditation. Und in all dem, was man tut, ist ganz wesentlich nicht zu urteilen. Und interessant ist ja, wenn man sich darauf einlässt, ich habe selber auch so einen Kurs gemacht, um das für mich selber auszuprobieren, ist, dass man beispielsweise sich sagen soll, nicht ich bin traurig, sondern da ist Trauer. Oder nicht mein Fuß ist kalt, sondern da ist Kälte in meinem Fuß. Und ein bisschen fühlt sich das so an, als würde man sich dauernd von sich selber distanzieren. Und manchmal habe ich mich gefragt, ist das wirklich gesund?
If you put it that way, no, it's not healthy at all. But this is not about detachment. It's about what you would call non-attachment. I don't know how that's going to translate into German, but there's a big difference between detachment, which is creating separation, and non-attachment, which is seeing with clarity and holding the entire space of your experience and your relationship to experience, inwardly and outwardly. So this is not about separation. This is about, in some sense, a gigantic embrace of the actuality of things. And that the body scan is one door into meditative experiences. The mindful yoga is another door, and the sitting meditation or walking meditation or eating meditation, you could say that, to a first approximation, they're all different doors into the same room. So they're all forms of mindfulness, and they're all forms of formal meditation. And then, as I said at the beginning, the really essential form of meditation is how you live your life from moment to moment. So even as we're speaking, you're looking at me, I'm looking at you. There's a certain kind of awareness about that. You obviously are thinking about what the next question might be, but also listening to what I'm saying now. When we hold this in awareness, that's mindfulness. If you're not mindful, then you'll lose a certain kind of thread or forget what you really meant to ask or something like that. And we could be talking also at cross purposes where we're not really hearing each other and responding appropriately.
Ich fühle mich fast schon ertappt und muss mir überlegen, wie ich jetzt weitermache. Nein, was interessant ist, ist bei diesem Bodyscan, also dieser Übung, in der man sich hinlegt und versucht, den Fuß ganz bewusst zu spüren, das Knie und den ganzen Körper, da ist es mir zum Beispiel immer passiert, dass ich eingeschlafen bin. Und dann dachte ich zuerst, das ist doch wunderbar. Ich bin keine besonders gute Schläferin. Dann dachte ich, das ist doch prima. Wenn ich schon mal schlafen kann, kann ich mich entspannen. Aber darin besteht nicht das Ziel dieser Meditation. Man soll wach bleiben.
Well, a lot of the people who come to MBSR, to the Stress Reduction Clinic, have problems with sleep because it's one of the first things to go when you're really stressed or have emotional pain or chronic physical pain or whatever. So I usually make a deal with people in the stress reduction clinic. I say, it's fine if you use the body scan guided meditation to go to sleep at night, as long as you use it some other time during the day to fall awake. So the real challenge is, can we learn how to fall awake rather than merely fall asleep? But you're right, we're all very sleep deprived, so it's important to develop a certain kind of deep rest. But the deepest rest is actually when you drop into wakefulness without an agenda. And you mentioned before being non-judgmental. Now, anybody who tries this is going to recognize almost immediately that it's virtually impossible to be non-judgmental. We have ideas and opinions about everything. We like this, we don't like that. You know, so non-judgmental doesn't mean that you won't have any judgments. It means that you will be aware of how judgmental you usually are and then not judge that. So you're attempting to suspend the habit of judging and liking and disliking and developing a certain kind of open, spacious equanimity of balance, emotional balance, clarity, and so forth. But you're actually not trying to generate that feeling. You're discovering that that's an innate quality of being that's intrinsic to you. And all you need to do is, in some sense, suspend all the attachment that we get caught up in our thoughts and our emotional reactions. So that's not detachment, it's non-attachment. We just don't get caught in it quite as quickly. Or if we do, we recognize it and we bring ourselves back. That becomes the practice. It's like weightlifting. Your mind goes off, you bring it back. Mind goes off, you bring it back. The weight, of course, helps you to grow the muscle. But when you're talking about mindfulness as a kind of muscle, so that the mind goes off, you bring it back. The mind goes off, you bring it back. The mind goes off, and it's someplace really interesting. You don't want to bring it back. You bring it back anyway. That's where the muscle starts to work with your own resistance to being present.
Sie haben vorhin erwähnt, viele in einer Stressbehandlungsklinik machen jetzt diese Mindfulness-Praxis oder man hat vielleicht chronische Schmerzen oder Schlafprobleme und versucht, solch eine Technik zu implementieren im eigenen Leben, damit es einem besser geht. Ihnen geht es ja schon gut. Was ist für Sie das Ziel des achtsamen Lebens? Oder würden Sie sagen, ich kann einfach gar nicht mehr anders leben?
Well, once you taste this, I mean, the question is, really, do you want to sleepwalk through your life? Or do you want to be awake for it? Do you want to be present for your children? Or do you want to just kind of think of them as like thoughts in your mind rather than being really present for them, or for your grandchildren, or for nature, or whatever it is? We can get so caught up in the automaticity of our lives that we're, as you said earlier, we're moving through our moments to get the better moments at some other time. And if you sum that over a lifetime, you could miss what's most important in your life. And who wants to do that? I noticed that you have a book of Thoreau there, Walden, and Thoreau's famous in the US for having said, well, is it all right if I quote from him?
Ja, natürlich.
Probably your viewers know that Thoreau lived in the 1830s in Concord, Massachusetts, and he went off to a lake called Walden Pond for close to 2 years and just lived there as simply as possible. And he said about that, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what they had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. So it's very easy to miss the living because we're so caught up in our heads. And in English, we even have the phrase lost in thought. Mm-hmm. We get so lost in thought, we're really lost. And if you do that over days, weeks, months, years, and decades, mm-hmm. you might miss the most important aspects of your own life.
Ich habe das Buch mitgenommen, weil Sie es ja ganz oft zitieren. In Ihrem Buch «Im Alltag Ruhe finden» spielt das eine große Rolle und ist ja heute ein bisschen dieses Buch in der Schweiz zumindest, die Bibel der Aussteiger. Sehr viele Menschen, die sich vielleicht auch gegen die gegenwärtige Zivilisation sträuben, die sich etwas anderes wünschen, lesen dieses Buch. Ein sehr berührendes Buch. Ich habe mich gefragt, dieser Thoreau, der kannte ja die Mindfulness-Bewegung nicht. Der kannte diese Art der Meditation nicht, sondern er hat sich vor allem hingegeben der Natur, dem Wechsel der Jahreszeiten, dem Leben mit dem Wasser. Er ist auch immer früh aufgestanden, wie Sie es auch empfehlen in Ihrem Buch. Aber er hat nicht diesen Weg beschritten, den Sie beschreiten. Dennoch hat er ähnliche Erfahrungen gemacht. Deswegen meine Frage, gibt es unterschiedliche Wege, an dieses Ziel zu gelangen?
Many different paths, just the way, you know, if you take Mount Everest, there are different paths up Mount Everest. Some are more difficult than others, but, you know, you could say there are an infinite number of paths to any particular point. In Thoreau's case, you said that he didn't, you know about mindfulness or speak about mindfulness, but all of Walden is a rhapsody, I would say, to mindfulness. He understood about the present moment, and he understood that nature was the teacher in some sense. And so he says he would sit in his doorway all day doing nothing. So anybody who saw him would say, what a lazy bum, he's not doing anything, he's just sitting there. But he was watching the sun move across the sky, the shadows change, the sound of the birds, be in touch with everything. Sometimes he would stand in the pond up to his nose and just watch what was going on in the surface with insects and so forth. So he was practicing mindfulness, but without using the word. So yes, the answer to your question is there are an infinite number of ways to skillfully cultivate mindfulness. But it helps to have some instruction because there are an even larger number of infinite ways to not do it skillfully and misunderstand what it's really about.
Eben, es gibt ja zum Beispiel viele Manager, die beginnen irgendwann zu joggen wie verrückt, um den Marathon zu rennen. Und die würden sagen, das ist meine Art der Mindfulness. Ich gehe täglich joggen und finde da ganz viel davon.
Running is a wonderful meditation.
Aber würden Sie sagen, das ist sozusagen gleich gut? Mindfulness praktizieren, wie Sie es vorschlagen, oder täglich joggen gehen?
Well, if those people are not going to sit because they're bored or they don't like it and they want their body to be moving, the mind wouldn't have any problem with the body running. So the question is, what is their orientation towards experience? That's what mindfulness really is. It's about relationality. What is your relationship to experience? So cutting vegetables for dinner could be a mindful experience. Washing the dishes could be a mindful experience. Running a marathon, certainly a mindfulness experience. Sooner or later, making love is a mindfulness experience. Saying goodnight to your children, waking them up in the morning. It really only has to do with how present you're willing to be without an agenda. Mm-hmm. Or how present you're willing to be with an agenda, but recognizing what a strong agenda you have and not getting caught in it.
Mhm. Die Quellen der Mindfulness sind ja ein Stück weit auch der Buddhismus. Sie haben selber auch gesagt, dass Sie in verschiedenen Klöstern waren und auch da Meditation gelernt haben. Selber bezeichnen Sie sich aber nicht als Buddhist. Haben Sie selber überhaupt keinen Bezug zur Religiosität?
It's true, I do not call myself a Buddhist. I refer to myself as an ardent student of Buddhist meditation because the most articulate description, if you will, of mindfulness is in the Buddhist, comes out of the Buddhist tradition. So it's often spoken of as the heart of Buddhist meditation, mindfulness. But you have to understand that in all Asian languages, the word for heart and the word for mind is the same word. So if you're not understanding mindfulness as heartfulness when you hear the word in English, mindfulness, then you're not really understanding it. And Achtsamkeit, by the way, does not have that meaning at all. So there are problems in translating this so that it really makes sense to people. But that said, I don't think that there's any problem at all with, in terms of the classical religious affiliations. Every one of the religious traditions has mindfulness inside of it in one way or another. They just have different names for it. So the real thing is not about like how you identify in terms of religion, but how much you are in alignment with the deepest teachings of your faith, if you will. And some people have faith in sort of higher power, and other people have faith in nature or beauty or the universe or whatever you call it. But human beings are very interesting creatures because we're so small in such a big universe, but we're also sentient, we're conscious. And so there's this gigantic mystery and the question of meaning. What does it all mean? And we live for very, very brief moments, we call lifetimes. So how are we going to be in relationship to it? And so you can have a deep sacred experience of the sacred in a path that actually looks from the outside to be secular. And that, in some sense, provides deep meaning no matter what how you identify in terms of religion. The very word religion means religio, from the Latin religio, which means to bind together. So this is, in some sense, connecting the dots that allow us to understand our smallness and our enormity, our relationship to the entire universe and our relationship to our home, to our home planet, to our children, to our parents, and so forth. So it provides profound meaning without necessarily a catechism or a philosophy or a faith that you have to identify with.
Ich finde interessant, dass ganz viel von dem, was Sie sagen, mich eigentlich erinnert an die Lehre der Stoa, der Philosophenschule in der Antike. Denken wir an Seneca, Marc Aurel, Epiktet, die ähnliche Dinge eigentlich gesagt haben, wie beispielsweise diese Seelenruhe, sich nicht binden, nicht urteilen, möglichst ausgeglichen leben, aber auch dieses Gefühl von ein Teilsein eines großen Ganzes, eines Kosmos. Trotzdem hatte ich den Eindruck in dieser ganzen Literatur, die ich gelesen habe, es wird eigentlich nie auf die Stoa Bezug genommen, sondern stets auf den Buddhismus. Spielt das tatsächlich überhaupt keine Rolle in der ganzen Diskussion?
You know, this is where I'm in deep water because I'm not being a philosopher, I'm not really familiar with the Stoics. In the English language, Stoicism means all of what you said, but it also means a certain kind of rigidity, a certain kind of holding back a little bit, that I'm going to tolerate pain. I'm going to tolerate what I don't like. And that has nothing to do with mindfulness. So I can't answer your question about how the roots of mindfulness might actually come out of the Stoic tradition. But I will say this, there are people who say that the Greeks, actually, Alexander the Great, wound up in India, as far as the Indus River. They interacted with early Buddhism, and so which was 200 years earlier, so there may actually be threads of this that entered the Western world far earlier than anybody really recognizes. And I think ultimately, if you go back to even hunters and gatherers, when we were all just hunting and gathering long before history, that, evolutionarily speaking, mindfulness would be a trait that would be highly selected for, because if you get too mindless in the forest, you're going to get eaten, maybe before you have children.
Wenn wir noch einmal zurückgehen zu diesem Boom, zu diesem enormen Erfolg dieser Bewegung, dann gibt es ja doch auch kritische Stimmen. Es gibt Leute, die diskutieren unter dem Titel Mindfulness diese ganze Kritik und sagen, der Grund, warum so viele Leute Zuflucht suchen in solchen Kursen, ist unsere endlos gestresste Gesellschaft und ist auch eine Form von, kapitalisiertem Wirtschaftssystem, das die Leute unter Druck setzt. Die müssen immer mehr arbeiten, haben vielleicht immer weniger Rechte. Es ist die ganze Stressgesellschaft, die müde wird. Und eigentlich müssten wir doch ansetzen bei einer Veränderung der Gesellschaft und nicht bei einer Anpassung von uns selber. Wie reagieren Sie auf diese Kritik?
I completely agree with it. It's very easy whenever anything goes viral or becomes really popular, for it to immediately get really dumbed down and denatured to the point where it's unrecognizable. Mindfulness is one of the most profound and one of the most beautiful and one of the most ethical teachings that human beings have ever come up with. And it would be a tragedy if the capitalist, sort of materialist perspective on it just destroyed it before it really had a chance to flower in a deep way. So there is an ethical foundation to mindfulness. It's about optimizing well-being and minimizing harm. And in medicine, the Hippocratic Oath is to first do no harm. Now, how are you going to even know if you're doing harm without mindfulness? In terms of its use in the military and its use in corporations and whether the corporations are exploiting it and all of that, this is in some sense the risk and the price of success. You can't have success without everybody wanting it, and then a lot of people are going to try to exploit it, commodify it, and so forth. But mindfulness is so powerful that I have a lot of conviction that it's going to actually wind up being okay, that people will get very bored with mindfulness unless they taste it in a very deep way. And in terms of transforming society, just 3 or 4 months ago in the United Kingdom, the Parliament issued an all-party parliamentary report called A Mindful Nation UK, in which they were calling for much more funding and programs in mindfulness in 4 areas of British society: education, healthcare, criminal justice, and technology development. So that's never happened before on the planet, that a governing body has issued a report emphasizing the importance of mindfulness.
Dennoch ist es so, im Film Die neue Achtsamkeit, der gerade vorhin gezeigt wurde und den man auch online noch sehen kann, da sagt ein Manager von SAP, eine Firma, in der Mindfulness-Kurse umsonst angeboten werden über Mittag für die Mitarbeitenden, sagt, selbstverständlich machen wir das eigentlich aus dem Grund der Effizienzsteigerung für unsere Firma. Man hat also so ein bisschen den Eindruck eines trojanischen Pferdes, das eingebracht wird in Firmen. Und SAP ist ja nicht alleine, also Ford, Monsanto, Walt Disney, Google, alles Firmen, die solche Kurse, Mindfulness-Kurse anbieten. Schmerzt Sie das auch oder sagen Sie weiterhin einfach, das ist sozusagen die Kehrseite des Erfolges? Ich bin, glaube ich, einfach noch nicht ganz sicher, dass das tatsächlich seinen Weg dann finden wird. Es müsste ja schlussendlich auch das Management verändern.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you pushing back on that score. And in certain instances, it is painful to me. And in particular, that SAP thing, it did not ring true to me, if you don't mind my being completely honest about it, in Swiss TV, since it was actually a Swiss television program. I know some of the people who are teaching mindfulness at Google. They are fantastic. I know people who are teaching mindfulness in Twitter and in various other places in Silicon Valley and in the Ford Motor Company and so forth. And listen, when you are interfacing with capitalism, basically the way I see it is what we're doing is we're engaging in the martial art of Aikido, mindful Aikido. So maybe the capitalists think that they are exploiting mindfulness to, say, make the workforce work faster or work harder or for less money or whatever, be more efficient, be less stressed. But they don't actually understand the potential power of mindfulness to transform the actuality of their organizations. So while I'm not like pie in the sky optimistic about this, I do feel that there is a potential health to what's going on here, that even if certain people are exploiting it or trying to utilize it for their own ends, that the overall prognostication at this particular moment is more positive than negative, which is, by the way, you might say, well, why are you going to Davos? Why do you go to the World Economic Forum and talk to the masters of the universe and teach them?
Da und haben jeden Morgen meditiert.
Teach them to meditate. Yeah. And the answer is the same reason. You're planting seeds and you don't know where they're going to take root. But all human beings, you could say, from a Buddhist perspective, all human beings in their truest nature, are Buddhists. They're already, in some sense, enlightened, okay, whatever that means. And what we're trying to do is cultivate that as a kind of primary vector of transformation and healing. And that might include transforming the capitalist system even, because it may not survive the next 200 or 300 years, or even 50 years, because of what's going on in all sorts of technological fields, including energy use.
Meditieren Sie mit den Managern nur in Ihren Kursen oder besprechen Sie mit denen auch Dinge und kritisieren Sie sie allenfalls auch?
Mostly we practice together, because if we're just talking about it, it's just talk. It's just philosophy. It's just like conceptual. The practice is not merely conceptual. It's cultivation of awareness. Now, awareness is something that you don't have to get because it's intrinsic to you, but we don't exercise the muscle, so we don't know how to get there a lot. And then there's also this whole question of self-interest. Like, if you want to maximize the gain for yourself personally, but then you hold that in mindfulness, you may see that your selfishness is actually taking you in the direction of unhappiness and of causing more harm than good. By the way, now that we know enough about global warming and what's going on with the environment, you could call that a form of mindfulness. We know enough to know that human activity and human, if you want to call it industry, is actually threatening life on this planet. How we respond to that will be a measure of our deepest genetic intelligence. And I think we're seeing people and nations rise to the occasion to transform how we are heating up the planet so we don't lose all of the glaciers and Antarctica and everything else. This is as much mindfulness as sitting like this and breathing in and breathing out.
Vielleicht bin ich nicht ganz so positiv in der Einschätzung dessen, was wir wirklich zu verändern bereit sind.
Good. Yeah, good. I love that you're pushing back on me, because you see, we're talking about the practicality of things. But from a certain perspective, if you think I'm overly optimistic, if I had told you in 1970 that meditation and yoga would enter the mainstream of medicine to the point where it actually generated a revolution in how people think about human beings and illness, and especially chronic illness, health, well-being, longevity, and so forth, you would have said I was out of my mind. If I had told you that the National Institutes of Health would be funding meditation research and mindfulness research in particular to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, you would have said, you're out of your mind. All that has come to pass in the past 36 years. So I don't have any real evidence that that suggests that I should be as pessimistic as possible rather than as optimistic as possible.
Lassen Sie mich zurückkommen zum achtsamen Leben, zu Ihrem Alltag, zu dem, was Sie empfehlen. Es geht ja eben nicht darum, wie Sie schon gesagt haben, in Bezug auf die Frage, ob Sie im Flugzeug schon meditiert haben, nur eine Meditation zu machen und dann wieder durchs Leben zu rennen, bis man am Abend wieder meditiert. Sondern es geht darum, diese Achtsamkeit in den Alltag zu integrieren. Sie sagen, man kann achtsam duschen, achtsam abwaschen, achtsam die Schuhe binden, achtsam Kinder erziehen und so weiter. Ich frage mich, wie können Sie, Jon Kabat-Zinn, so erfolgreich sein, wenn Sie gleichzeitig so achtsam leben? Weil das braucht ja unglaublich viel, sage ich jetzt mal, Langsamkeit.
Yeah, and what happens to ambition, right? To get someplace else, to be successful and so forth.
Sie wissen schon, was Journalisten so fragen.
No, it's like it's commonsensical. I mean, anybody would ask that kind of a question. I'm not sure how to respond to it. It's my experience that human beings really are looking for deep well-being and satisfaction. That's why we're so greedy. That's why we're trying to always get to some better place. And what Thoreau is saying, yeah, you wind up getting to some better place in your grave when you're dead. And the moment before you realize, maybe I got it all wrong. So what I'm saying is, die now, get it over with. Then the rest of your life is a gift. And you can utilize your power, utilize your ambition, utilize your love to optimize your contribution to the world. And the first person that will benefit from that is you. But you won't be the only person to benefit because, in a sense, you become a gift to the world. And then the work that you do is more meaningful. It inspires other people. If a leader in a company embodies that kind of mindfulness, everybody in the company is inspired to work longer. Then the leader has to say, no, don't work longer, work smarter, because I want you to go home and take care of your children and not just be a big success at work. We don't need that much more money. You know, what we need is to have things be in a certain kind of larger balance where, yes, of course we're successful on the financial level, but that's not the absolute signature of success. Success has to be multidimensional, and we need to develop a corporation that actually nurtures its workforce.
Und wenn wir aber mitten im Alltag sitzen, wir kennen das alle, wir sind an unserem Schreibtisch, wir verlassen den Tisch, sagen wir für eine Stunde, für eine Sitzung, wir kommen zurück, zack, 20 neue E-Mails.
Yes.
Wie gehen Sie damit um?
That is a very big challenge. What you're really asking about is what the technology is doing to the present moment. And we've gone from an analog world to a digital world where we are so sucked into the digital that we forget that we're still analog beings. So no one solved the email question. Email for me is like a waterfall. It's like a fire hose. There's no possibility of responding to everything. So I dance with it. I don't respond to emails. My non-response is a response. I mindfully don't respond. Or I take my time. I don't respond to email on my phone. I don't ever check email on my phone. When I'm ready, I will deal with my email, but I don't want it to take me away from the present moment. Now, how good am I at that? Probably not very good, because everybody that I'm in email contact with, I love and I'm in deep relationship with, and I'm talking about work more than family. So there's this flowering, as you said, of mindfulness, and I'm very much a part of it. But too much of a good thing's not a good thing. So again, it's like the yoga of balance. And every one of us needs to find our own way to do that. Every one of us gets the same 24 hours in the day, whether Google exists or doesn't exist, whether Microsoft exists or doesn't exist, whether there's email or texting or whatever. And we need to find new ways to maintain our humanity in an analog form. Excuse me. Sherry Turkle at MIT studies the effects of the technology on young people, and some of the results are absolutely shocking. So there's every reason to cultivate mindfulness in parenting, mindfulness in education, mindfulness in
Darüber haben Sie ja auch ein Buch geschrieben, gemeinsam mit Ihrer Frau Mila, Mindful Parenting.
Yes.
Das scheint Ihnen irgendwie gelungen zu sein. Ihre 3 Kinder sind groß geworden und mit dem Sohn gemeinsam geben Sie sogar Meditationskurse mittlerweile.
Yes, I do. And both my daughters are yoga teachers. I don't know how to explain that. It could be in some sense contagious, but it's not me doing it. They're not imitating me. If they're doing it, it's because they came to it in their own unique ways. And I tried to stay as much out of that picture as possible.
Das ist ja etwas, was sich auch durch Ihr Leben zieht. Sie sind nicht gerne eine Person mit Autorität. Sie haben schon im Krankenhaus nie gerne einen weißen Kittel getragen, weil Sie sich gerne auf die Ebene der Patienten begeben wollten. Aber jetzt sind Sie für viele Leute fast ein Guru.
See, the word authority is very interesting. And in the German-speaking world, authority has a lot of import, a lot of gravitas. But authority in English is related to the word author and related to the word authenticity. So it's not that I shun authority, But the deepest authority is to be, in some sense, the author of your own life. You can only do that if you're mindful. You can only do that if you're awake. And then what other people might feel from you or project onto you, which you don't need to get caught in, is that there's a certain kind of authenticity. People will say, "You're so real. You're so real." And I go, "Please." But what they're really pointing to is that when anybody ever is present, you love that. Mm-hmm. The Dalai Lama is often referred to in Tibetan as kundan. Kundan means presence. If you hang out with the Dalai Lama and watch him very carefully, he's very here, now. And not looking at his watch and getting distracted by other thoughts or something like that. So this cultivating the capacity of presence touches other people, because when I'm present, then because we're in relationship, our relationship's different because of my willingness to hold the space of wakefulness and heartfulness. And so that will be felt. And it, in some sense, without ever saying a word, gives other people permission to find, not to copy me, or the Dalai Lama, or Mother Teresa, or anybody else that's a hero to you, but to find out who you are. And to not get caught in thinking that who you think you are, or the narrative of you, I'm so this, I'm so that, I'm so depressed, I'm so sad, I'm so frightened, that narrative is who you really are. You're so much bigger than your narrative, and ultimately who you are may be more akin to wakefulness, to awareness, to mindfulness, to heartfulness, than to the story of me.
Mhm. Jetzt hatten wir ja vorhin darüber gesprochen, wie man sich verhält am Schreibtisch, wenn diese vielen E-Mails kommen. Und Sie haben ein Stück weit eine Antwort gegeben. Gleichzeitig möchte ich zurückfragen, viele von uns sind ja, wie soll ich sagen, nicht so frei wie Sie, ihr Leben zu gestalten. Viele Menschen sind gebunden. Sie müssen vielleicht ihren Lebensunterhalt verdienen, eine Familie ernähren. Gleichzeitig denke ich auch immer, es ist ein bisschen eine Ausrede zu sagen, ich habe keine Zeit. Sondern das Allermeiste, was wir tun in unserem Leben, ist Präferenzen zum Ausdruck bringen. Möchte ich lieber noch ins Kino oder möchte ich lieber ins Yoga oder möchte ich lieber mehr schlafen? Eigentlich lauter Entscheidungen, die wir fällen können. Und trotzdem denke ich oft, es ist so unglaublich schwierig, diese Entscheidungen so zu treffen, dass ich am Ende damit zufrieden bin, wenn ich auf lange Sicht auf mein Leben blicke. Man hat oft das Gefühl, das Wesentliche kommt zu kurz. Warum? Warum leben wir so?
Well, it's a very profound question, so thank you for that. And the answer is, like, I don't know. I think it's just a bad habit that if everybody's doing it, then we do it too. But when you stop and you begin to inquire about that, as I said, everybody gets the same 24 hours. How we're going to be in relationship to that, in terms of sleep, in terms of food, in terms of family, in terms of ambition, in terms of getting work done, is really for us to navigate. And each one of us really needs to find our own way so that we're living our life authentically rather than some story about like how we should be. When you do that, the stress seems much more controllable because you can navigate that. And besides, there's a certain way in which we think we're in control of everything. But, you know, we're hardly in control of anything. I mean, you know, one day you can be healthy, the next day you get a diagnosis and your whole life is different. This happens to people every single day. So it's not so much what happens to you that's most important, but how you choose to be in relationship to it. And then life itself, in some sense, becomes the curriculum. And that curriculum will shape you in ways that are transformative and healing. It's not always fun. It's not always pleasant. It's not just, oh, you know, wonderful, I'm a Buddha, you know, no problem. It's more like the cartoon. Mm-hmm. Nothing happens next. Mm-hmm. This is it. this is it. If you don't like this, what makes you think the next moment's going to be any better? But if you handle this moment of now, then the future's already different because you've showed up in this one, even with the unpleasant, even with what you most don't want to deal with, like, say, a cancer diagnosis or a chronic pain condition that doesn't allow you to sleep. You can befriend those in ways that are transformative. The science is showing that it's transformative at the level of the nervous system, at the level of the chromosomes, at the level of the telomeres, but much more importantly, it's the level of the heart.
Und eine hilfreiche Sache, stelle ich mir vor, ist natürlich auch, wenn die Person, die man vielleicht am meisten liebt, mitmacht in dieser ganzen Haltung zum Leben. Haben Sie eigentlich Ihre Frau dazu gebracht, auch zu meditieren, oder haben Sie sich schon als Meditierende kennengelernt?
No, it's like this. My wife, I have to meditate 24 hours a day to keep up with my wife, who is naturally mindful.
Das ist die schönste Liebeserklärung, die man von Ihnen kriegen kann.
Well, and yes. And also I will say that over the almost 50 years that I've been formally practicing meditation, in a, seated meditation as well as other forms, I've come to actually see it as a love affair. This is not just one more thing I have to squeeze into my day, follow my breath and be relaxed or something like that. It's a love affair with life. And the only time we're ever alive is in this moment. So if we miss it, we've missed our life in this moment. So from that point of view, taking your seat is a radical act of sanity, it's a radical act of love, and it's a radical act of relationality. So I don't need my wife or anybody else to meditate for me to benefit from it. Sometimes we do actually sit together. Sometimes we actually go on retreat together, but those are very rare. But from the perspective of what I was saying about moment by moment, when we have dinner together, when we cook dinner together, or when we do whatever it is that we do, if we're present for each other without forcing each other to be a certain way so that I'll be more happy, that's love. And that's mindfulness.
Jon Kabat-Zinn, haben wir jetzt ein achtsames Gespräch geführt?
I think you already know the answer to that.
Ich füge dem nichts weiteres hinzu. Vielen herzlichen Dank.
Thank you.
Wer achtsam ist, erkennt, die Realität setzt sich zusammen aus vielen einzelnen Momenten der Wahrnehmung. Ein bisschen wie eine Collage, eine Technik, die aus der Kunstgeschichte nicht mehr wegzudenken ist und die für die Dadaisten vor 100 Jahren eine prägende Ausdrucksform war. Heute Abend um 23:20 Uhr zeigen wir Ihnen den Film Remix Manifesto, der die Geschichte der Collage nacherzählt. Und wer es spielerisch mag, dem empfehle ich unser Doc-Projekt Data. Klicken Sie rein und lassen Sie sich überraschen. Jetzt aber vor allem einen schönen und achtsamen Sonntag.